Hello guys, RMP792 here. Right, there was a comment on my Battlefleet, on the first part of my Battlefleet Gothic Armada Let's Play, from somebody whose comment is, the words were basically, who is this guy? I don't know much about 40k lore. So, given that I am a big fan of 40k, and I think more people should be, because it's actually a really kind of fascinating science fiction universe, I am going to dub this video a primer on 40k lore. So this is primarily intended for people who know maybe a little bit, maybe nothing at all about the lore of 40k. It's going to be mostly me talking about the universe. I'm going to focus on some of the major races, and I may well do primer videos on different races and different things like that in the future if people like this. And just generally, this is intended for people who know not that much about the lore. If you do know a lot about the lore, please feel free to watch, because it's entirely possible I might get some stuff wrong and you might want to be smug and correct me in the comments. Because I don't claim to be a massive expert. I've read an awful lot of articles on the 40k wiki and things like that, which I do enjoy. So yes, for the most part, this is going to be me waffling about a universe that I really, really like. So, okay. The tagline for the Warhammer 40,000 universe is, it's in the grim dark future of the 41st millennium, there is only war. Which, is that light kind of hang on, I'm going to open the curtains a bit more so the light's a bit clearer. There we go. So yes. So the point is that it's called Warhammer 40k because it is set in the 41st millennium. So many, 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 many years in the future. And humanity has expanded out amongst the stars. We actually control fairly substantial chunks of the galaxy by this point. There are literally hundreds of thousands of worlds that we control. And all of that is nominally under the control of the Imperium. However, I'm actually going to start this by talking about the past. I'm going to go through this in a vaguely chronological order as a sort of brief history of the Imperium. Okay? So, humanity's quote-unquote golden age is an era that will later be known as the Dark Age of Technology, and that's estimated to last, I believe it's somewhere in the region of the 20th millennium through about the 25th. And during this time, humanity is basically, we expand significantly, we acquire all sorts of amazing technologies, we build truly incredible things, and humanity is actually a race to be genuinely proud of. We expand out amongst the stars, create hundreds of thousands of colony worlds. The human population goes from the billions into the hundreds of trillions. And we have technology that makes our life easier, including a group of robotic armies known as the Men of Iron, I believe, though I'd have to look that up to be certain. And our method of travelling faster than light is to use a subdimension known as the warp. And the point is, the warp is very much influenced by the psychic emanations of living beings. So, that's actually fairly central to some stuff I'll talk about later. But the warp does allow for faster-than-light travel, but it's very difficult to navigate through. In order to do it properly, you need navigators, which are humans with enhanced abilities. Specifically, they have a third eye, right in the centre of the forehead, which allows them to see into the warp and navigate ships through. Without a navigator, a ship will get lost or just flat out destroyed. You also need something called Geller fields if you're going through the warp, because if you don't, your ship will just get ripped apart instantly, because the laws of physics, they're weird inside the warp. That's kind of the point. That's why fast-than-light travel works there. So you can't travel through so traveling through the warp is risky. And it gets riskier when there's something called a warp storm. Because the warp is very unsettled. It ebbs and flows, and in sometimes it's very easy to navigate through, relatively speaking, and sometimes even attempting it will flat out destroy your ship. The Dark Age of Technology ends when there's a few causes, but the ultimate end is a massive warp storm that basically completely cuts off all interstellar travel for a period of at least a couple of millennium. So humanity basically regresses. We enter a true dark age, and every planet's cut off, every planet's fending for itself. Some of them manage to hang on to most of the technology, but end up as sort of violent, repressive groups. Some of them actually come out of it reasonably okay. They manage to hang on to most of their morals, hang on to their technology, but most of them descend into varying levels of barbarism. Because a lot of the really big planets couldn't grow enough food for their own populations because they were getting it in from agrarian worlds. And a lot of the agrarian worlds didn't have particularly advanced technology. So so without each other, they kind of fall apart. Earth, in particular, ends up split between a couple of dozen different nations and warlords and warring factions, and God knows what else. Then, somewhere around the 27th, 28th millennium, a single figure emerges. A man who will later become known as the Emperor, and I have no idea what his real name is. I've never seen it written down anywhere. Sorry, I'm drinking again. But, yes, the Emperor manages to successfully reunite mankind by use of genetically enhanced soldiers, known as the Thunder Guard? This is the problem. My knowledge of this period of history is limited to what I've read, so I'd have to actually look up a lot of this information to double check it. But anyway, so having successfully united Earth, the Emperor sets his sight on the stars. By this point, the warp storm has abated, which means he can start pushing his forces out into the galaxy. His first objective is Mars. Now, Mars managed to hang on to a lot of its technology, and in fact is very technologically advanced, but it's kind of found this weird balance, because the tech priests of Mars worship a being known as the Omessiah, who is, put it this way, the skull of the Omessiah is always drawn as half human, half a human skull, and the other half fully cybernetic. So the Omessiah is meant to be this perfect combination of technology and human being. I feel bits of skin on my lips there. So yes, and they eventually sign a treaty with the people of Mars, whereby they will be permitted to keep worshipping the Omessiah. And there's an unsubtle implication that the Emperor almost claims to be the Omessiah, because for the record, looking at the Emperor is pretty much like looking at a god. And you're never entirely sure whether that's genetic manipulation, whether that's some sort of incredible luck in the gene pool, but the Emperor is an incredibly powerful psyker, so he has incredible psychic abilities, and he's at least 2.5 meters tall, probably a bit more. It could well be 3. And he walks around pretty much everywhere encased in golden armor. So every time you look at the Emperor, it's pretty difficult not to drop to your knees and bow in front of him. There's a reason why he'll later will be referred to as the God Emperor. So he forms a treaty with Mars, and they pretty much assume that he is the Omessiah. And they then begin building ships. A lot of them. Because they're going to go on something called the Great Crusade to try and reunite all the lost colonies of man. But in order to do that, the Emperor knows he's going to need something unique. He's going to need incredible warriors. Men who can stand up to the darkest that the universe has to offer and stare it right back at down to where it belongs. So he begins work on the Primarch project. And with that, he creates 20 Primarchs using part of his own genetic code as a basis. And the 20 Primarchs, at least 2 of whom have been lost. We don't know what happened to at least 2 of them. But each of the 20 Primarchs has their own unique variation. So, for example, Sanguinus, who is probably my favourite Primarch, has this incredibly unique genetic mutation where he has a pair of gorgeous angel wings sticking out his back. And he's the he's the head of the Blood Angels, because each of the Primarchs is basically, their genetic information is used to create a legion of Space Marines. 20 Primarchs, 20 legions. As I say, 2 of them are missing, so we don't know what happened to them. But each of the a Space Marine is, to all intents and purposes, man plus. They start off as humans, and somewhere around the age of 10 to 12, they basically get recruited into a Space Marine Legion or chapter, and they go through a series of upgrades. So there's genetic modification. So their ribs, for example, harden into a solid plate rather than being interspersed. They have additional organs placed in. They have because they've got backup heart, additional lungs, and many, many upgrades, and they eventually end up well north of 2 meters tall. The Primarchs are to Space Marines what Space Marines are to mortal men. They are, they're additional, they're taller, they're stronger, they're faster, they're smarter, and each one of them is a tactical genius. They are suitable to be the leaders of their, legion. If the Emperor is at the top of the pile, the Primarchs are the next ones down. They are his generals, and they're also his sons because they are, as I said, they're based on his own genetic information. However, the Warp actually has a consciousness. Specifically, there are 4 gods of chaos who basically live inside the Warp. Because, as I said, the Warp is formed from the psychic emanations of living beings. And after a long time, those psychic emanations form together into conscious beings. So there are 4 chaos gods, which I'll talk about when I get on to chaos later. But they could foresee what the Emperor was trying to do and knew it was a threat to them. So they created a warp storm inside the Emperor's own fortress and scattered the still infant Primarchs. In fact, they were basically babies at that point. They hadn't even been released from their incubation pods at that point, and they scattered them across the galaxy. Now, the Emperor still had the genetic information, and he could use it to build his legions of Space Marines, but he didn't have his generals. So he led the Great Crusade himself initially, and they spread out. By the time of the beginning of the Horus Heresy book series, there's at least the fleet that's focused on in the first book is Fleet 63. And there's probably a hell of a lot more than that. So there's a lot of fleets, a lot of ships, and a hell of a lot of Space Marines, all scattering out, reclaiming lost colonies. And no is not an acceptable answer when an expedition fleet comes knocking. If the answer is, "Oh, thank God, more humans, we'd love to join you," fantastic, they'll take that and be happy with it. If the answer is, "Oh, we're not sure, I mean, what do we get out of it?" There'll be a case of, "Well, you'll probably get this and this and this, and of course you'll be reunited with humanity and we won't shoot you." Wait, what was that last one? But if they basically turn them down, that's when they get messy. That's when they send in the Space Marine legions and they kill anyone who resists, basically. Because they are reuniting humanity and they can't afford to be nice about it, because the universe is a deeply unpleasant place. So that's where, and over the course of the Great Crusade, he starts picking up the Primarchs. The first one he finds is Horus. Horus is very much referred to as the Emperor's favourite son. And it's kind of understandable why, because Horus is really amazing. He's a tactical genius. He's a great diplomat. He's a brilliant leader, which is exactly what he was designed to be. And eventually, they reunite. I won't say all the Primarchs, just most of them, because as I say, there's at least 2 who we have no idea what the hell happened to them. They've been struck for Imperial records for some reason. And basically, almost every Primarch, with one exception, as basically, after they landed on their planet, they ended up in charge of it in one way or another. Whether that be from taking control, earning their place as a skilled warrior and just taking control, or in one case actually becoming a sort of quasi-religious cult leader and just taking over the entire planet. So, but because let's face it, as I said, when they're fully grown, the Primarchs are massively imposing, and you pretty much want to do what they tell you, because they are just they are the best leaders you could possibly have. So flash forward in time a bit, and the Imperium is doing pretty well, reuniting the galaxy. There's still a few holdouts, but for the most part, the galaxy is theirs. And then that's when the wheels come off. Horus, who, as I mentioned earlier, was the Emperor's favourite son, leads a rebellion against the rest of the Imperium, known as the Horus Heresy. And for reasons that are gone into massively in-depth in the Horus Heresy book series, which I do recommend you read because it's quite interesting, he basically ends up leading about half the Space Marine legions in his wake, because he gets their Primarchs to go along with him. And this leads to a lot of very, very bloody battles. The heresy goes on for somewhere in the region of a decade. And in that time, many, many, many millions of people are killed. Probably billions. And all of this is because Horus has been corrupted by the forces of chaos. I mentioned earlier the 4 chaos gods. They are Nurgle, Khorne, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch. And they are well, they are horrendously powerful beings who can manipulate reality pretty much as they want. And they want power, to all intents and purposes. And as I say, since they're formed from the psychic emanations of humans and other living beings, the more people believe in them and the more they are terrified of them, the more power they gain. So, having been corrupted by the forces of chaos, Horus eventually leads his fleet against Earth itself, against Terra. And there's a pretty epic battle. There's firefights all over the planet, using Space Marines, legions of the Imperial Army, and Titans. And Titans are basically colossal war machines, which are, a couple of 100 meters tall. Think the Jaegers from Pacific Rim, just with a lot more guns. In fact, Titan could kick the crap out of a Jaeger without even trying. But anyway, yes. And eventually it all comes down to one battle. The battle between Horus and the Emperor. And the Emperor, finally realizing that he has to do something, teleports along with a strike team that's led by Sanguinus, the guy with the Primarch with the awesome angel wings, and teleports straight to Horus's flagship. And they engage their enemy. Sanguinus eventually ends up face to face with Horus, who by this point is badly corrupted by the forces of chaos, which do seriously mess with you. And Sanguinus manages to damage Horus's armor before he is killed. And that arguably is what allows the Emperor to win. When the Emperor eventually goes into battle against his favourite son, he holds back. He can't bring himself to kill his favourite son. But Horus takes advantage of that and beats the living hell out of him. He beats the Emperor mostly to death. And the Emperor, realising what's about to happen, in a moment of desperation, lashes out with his full psychic might. And the Emperor is incredibly powerful. And doing so, he kills Horus. He obliterates him entirely, destroys his very soul. But it takes pretty much all the Emperor has left. So the Emperor is pretty much dying by this point. Badly dying. Even his incredible metabolism, his incredible body cannot keep him alive. So they inter him in a device known as the Golden Throne of Terror, which basically it keeps the Emperor alive and in a form of suspended animation. With Horus dead, the rest of the traitor forces break off because they've lost their War Master, they've lost their leader, and they retreat into an area of space known as the Eye of Terror, where the warp bleeds into reality. And bleeding into reality is not good. The laws of physics inside the Eye of Terror are weird. So Horus, having formed alliances with, among others, members of the Adeptus Mechanica on Mars, so they end up becoming the Dark Adeptus, and eventually they retreat into the Eye of Terror, and all the traitor Primarchs who are still alive, which is about 4 or 5 of them, I think, all end up ascending to become demon princes. Because now I'm going to go on to actually talk a little bit more about chaos, or I will do in a second. So all of that took place in the 31st millennium. It's now 10 millennia later. The Emperor is still interned on the Golden Throne, but in that time, a small cult that was worshipping him as a god has now become a mainstream religion, to the point where if you refuse to accept that the Emperor is a god, his followers will kill you, probably with fire. So they are religiously devoted to him and fanatically loyal. And the universe is falling apart. The technology hasn't advanced. In fact, it's regressed because they no longer research anything, because research is heretical. Science is heretical. So for example, they believe that all machines have machine spirits, and that you can do certain things to keep the machine spirits happy, and as long as you do that, it'll continue to function properly. So one example of that is, if you want to keep the machine spirit inside your bolter happy, which is your sort of Space Marine rifle type weapon, if you want to keep it happy, you keep it oiled, you keep it polished, and generally it's basic weapon maintenance, and they use that to keep the machine spirit happy, and that's what keeps their weapons working as far as they are concerned, because they don't understand the science behind it anymore. So the Empire, the Imperium has become incredibly regressive, and the Emperor's dream for a golden age is dead. The Imperium is slowly dying, and that's the point at which you enter. That's the point at which everything is said. By this point, the 20 legions of Space Marines, or the 10 or so that were still loyal, have all broken up into smaller chapters. The simple reason for that was they decided that no one man could ever control that many super warriors ever again. They couldn't risk it. So all of the Space Marine legions were broken up into much smaller chapters, and chapters are meant to have 1,000 Marines in nominally. Plus additional recruits and those in training. So, each Space Marine chapter is a lot smaller than an old Space Marine Legion, but they also have their versatility, and you can usually tell which of the original legions spawned each chapter. Especially in their preferred tactical doctrine, because each of the Primarchs had a different style of fighting, and each of them kind of imposed that on his Space Marines. Fulgrim, for example, was obsessed with being perfect, so the Emperor's children were obsessed with being perfect in battle. Angeron, on the other hand, was a psychotic lunatic who preferred to charge in, get in close, and kill the enemy with a couple of chain axes. So his World Eaters were exactly the same. They prefer to get in close, bloody, and kill everything in knife fight range. Interestingly, I just used 2 traitor Primarchs as examples rather than any of the loyalists. But anyway, So meanwhile, the traitor forces have done basically the same thing. Not because they did it to, spread power out, but just because they've broken up into smaller war bands. Small leaders taking groups to go off and kill people whenever the hell they want and just generally do unpleasantness. And that's basically the position where we stand. With Horus dead, the only one who really has, and all of the other Primarchs now demon princes who don't really give a damn. The only one who can really take control of the forces of chaos is Warmaster Abaddon, who was effectively Horus's second in command of his original legion, the Sons of Horus. So he's, on many, many occasions now, launched Black Crusades. So at the point in the story that Games Workshop is currently up to, we've just had the 13th Black Crusade. And that's basically when he gathers together everything he can from the forces of chaos and just goes for the Imperium and just does whatever damage he can before he eventually gets beaten back. And it's entirely possible that one of these Black Crusades could well be the thing to finish the Imperium off, because the forces of chaos are not the only threat they face, not by a long chalk. I mean, this video is 22 minutes long, and I've talked about one faction so far. So as I said, I think I might do separate video. Tell you what, over the course of this week, I'm going to do a series of separate videos where each time I talk about one specific race. Fair enough? But I'll talk about. Actually, no, Chaos is deep enough that it kind of needs its own thing. But yes, so that's basically where the Imperium stands, and at this point, the Imperium has 2 main military units plus arguably a third, which are the Space Marines, the Emperor's Mailed Fist. Most human beings will never see a Space Marine. They're creatures of myth and legend. But when they come, get the hell out of their way. Because they are superhuman warriors and they will not stop. The Imperial Guard are mostly conscripts. They are basic humans who are trying to defend their world in whatever way is possible. And they vary vastly from planet to planet, world to world. But they all have similar sort of structures. Think they have political commissars assigned to them, for example, who are authorized to execute anyone who looks like he's not trying hard enough to kill the enemy. So if you attempt to run away from a fight, your political commissar will just shoot you. And there's the basic Imperial Guard weapon is the las gun, and there's a classic Warhammer joke. What do you get if you duct tape a torch to a las gun? A double-barreled las gun. Because, let's face it, las guns are crap weapons, but enough of them en masse will hold back the enemy. And the Imperial Guard is backed up by a lot of very heavy firepower. They've got a lot of very good tanks, they've got a lot of very powerful artillery. So Imperial Guardsmen suck, but when there's enough of them, they can really make a difference and actually hold planets against the enemies of the Imperium. And the Imperial Guard is literally tens of billions strong. There's also the Imperial Navy, which is similar basic principle to the Imperial Guard, but they operate on board starships. And their job is basically hold back the tide of the enemy when they're coming in ships. The last of the kind of major forces are the Sisters of Battle, which are basically this ultra religious order who, they serve directly at the behest of the Imperial Inquisition, and their job is to ferret out witches and heretics, and they will kill them with fire. Seriously, a lot of their weapons are flame-based in one regard or another. But the Sisters of Battle are all kinds of badass because they use the same power armor as Space Marines, or stuff that's on a very similar level. And while they don't have the same genetic enhancements, they have the power of faith, which in the Warhammer universe actually means something, because as I said, the warp is affected by the psychic emanations of people, and psychers gain their ability from the warp. So it's heavily implied that enough Sisters of Battle working together who firmly believe in the power of their faith can actually influence the battlefield, by believing strongly enough, which is kind of a cool idea. So they're kind of fun. The Inquisition, which I mentioned, is pretty much an all-powerful organization who's broken into three parts. The Ordo Xenos, which is about defending humanity from aliens. The Ordo Hereticus, which is about dealing with internal threats. And the Ordo Malleus, which is about dealing with demons. Because demons are basically creatures from the warp. I'll talk about them more in detail when I talk about chaos. But the Ordo Hereticus is... No. Yeah. The Sisters of Battle are the militant arm of the Ordo Hereticus. Kill teams, which are basically made up of Space Marines from different chapters working together for one mission or a few missions, are the militant arm of the Ordo Xenos. And the Ordo Malleus, their militant arm are the Grey Knight Space Marines, and I love the Grey Knights. They are fabulous. Because every single Grey Knight, none of them get their genetic information from a Primarch. They get theirs straight from the Emperor. The Grey Knights were arguably the first Space Marine chapter to be founded, but they have no Primarch, and more importantly, none of them have ever betrayed the Emperor. None have ever fallen into chaos. That is their mark. And Grey Knights are about the only things that can face down the worst things in the warp and live to tell the tale. They're all powerful psychers, they are incredibly well trained, and they are just badass. But anyway, that's kind of a thing to go into later. So yeah, this has been a half-hour-long primer on the history of the Imperium. Yeah, I was originally thinking I'd try and cram 4 races into this video. I was going to talk about the Orcs, Eldar, Chaos, and the Imperium. Clearly not going to happen now, because otherwise this video would be 2 hours long. So yeah, I'll do another video tomorrow where I talk about Chaos. Then I'll do one where... Actually, if you're a Warhammer fan and you want to request to know about a specific race before any of the others, feel free to comment. But yeah, that was a basic primer. I suspect I got a few of the details wrong, particularly about things like which millennium stuff happened in, but all the basics should be right. And that's just a bit of background on the 40k universe. So yeah, I think that's all I've got for the moment. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in future videos, and very possibly the next one in this series.